Rural Nebraska, 1987. The Callahan family had owned their corn farm for generations. Acres upon acres of golden stalks stretched toward the horizon, whispering in the summer wind. But that year, something was different. The corn grew faster than ever before, too fast. By late July, the stalks had twisted into unnatural shapes, their leaves curling like grasping fingers. The ears swelled grotesquely, bulging as if something inside struggled to get out. The farmhands refused to go near the farthest fields. Bad soil, they muttered, though no one could explain why. Jake Callahan, 17 and restless, noticed it first. Standing at the kitchen window one evening, he frowned. "Dad, the corn, it's moving. And there's no wind." His father, a tough man hardened by years of backbreaking labor, let out a gruff chuckle. "Just your imagination, son." But the next morning, their dog Rusty was gone. They found his collar near the edge of the field, the leather shredded, the metal tag twisted like it had been chewed. Not by teeth, but by something stronger. Then came the scratches. Every midnight, without fail, something scraped against the farmhouse door. 3 slow, deliberate drags like claws testing the wood. Jake sat up in bed each night, gripping his baseball bat, heart pounding. His little sister, Emma, barely 10 years old, began sleeping with the lights on. One night she whispered, "I saw him, Jake. In the corn." Jake turned toward her, his throat dry. "Who?" "The tall man," she murmured. "He has no face." The air in Jake's room felt suddenly colder. Their father dismissed it as childish nightmares, but their mother grew anxious. She nailed the windows shut, hung crucifixes on the walls, and murmured prayers under her breath. Then one night the door handle rattled. Jake's father had had enough. He grabbed his shotgun, jaw clenched. "This ends now," he growled, stepping into the night. The fields rustled, but there was no wind. He disappeared into the corn, his voice ringing out. "Who's out there? Show yourself." A moment later, a wet, sickening crunch. Then silence. Jake, his mother, and Emma waited, breath held, but their father never returned. At dawn, they searched the field. His footprints led inward but never came back out. Only the shotgun remained, lying among the stalks, its barrel rusted as if it had been buried for decades. And near it, a single ear of corn, blackened, oozing a thick, dark fluid that smelled of rot. By morning, the entire cornfield was gone. Not cut, not harvested, just gone. Where the field had been, there was now nothing but barren soil stretching endlessly toward the horizon, as if nothing had ever grown there. No sign of their father. No sign of what had taken him. That evening, in the dim candlelight of their silent house, Emma lifted the lid off the serving dish at dinner and smiled. "We grew something new today," she whispered. Inside the dish, the corn had teeth. And it was still moving. The Thing in the Cornfield, Part 2. Rural Nebraska, 1987. The Callahan house was never truly quiet after that night. The walls groaned in the dark, the floors creaked when no one was walking. The air smelled of damp earth, like something had been dug up and left to rot. Jake stared at the thing in the serving dish. The kernels pulsed, shifting like tiny, twitching muscles. The jagged teeth, hidden between the husks, glistened in the dim light. "Emma," their mother whispered, her voice trembling. Where did you get that?" Emma didn't answer at first. She just kept smiling, rocking slightly in her chair. Then, in a voice too flat, too empty, she said, "The field is still there. We just can't see it." Jake's stomach twisted. He grabbed Emma's wrist, hard enough to snap her out of whatever trance she was in. "Emma, what do you mean? The cornfield is gone." Emma turned to him, her eyes glassy and distant. "No, it isn't. It's just somewhere else." Then, without another word, she pushed her plate away and left the table, humming a tune Jake didn't recognize. That night, something changed. At exactly midnight, the house breathed. The walls expanded, as if the house itself had lungs. The wooden beams creaked and groaned, the windows rattled in their frames. The smell of damp soil grew stronger. Then came the scratches. 3 slow, deliberate drags against the front door. Jake's mother clutched the cross around her neck, eyes wide. Jake grabbed the shotgun from where it rested against the wall, even though he knew it was useless. The barrel was still rusted, the trigger jammed. The door handle turned. Jake rushed forward, pressing his weight against the door. He could feel it pushing back, not like a person knocking, but like something shifting against the wood, something enormous. Emma stood at the bottom of the stairs, watching. Her lips moved silently. Jake could swear she was whispering something to the thing outside. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. The house fell still. But outside, through the window, Jake saw it. The cornfield was back. Not as it had been, but different. The stalks were taller, stretching into the sky, their shapes unnatural. Their leaves twitched like insect legs. And between the rows, dark figures moved, shifting, watching. Jake's breath hitched. One of them stepped forward. A tall figure, faceless, its elongated limbs swaying like the stalks. It raised one hand, long, spindly fingers curling, and pointed at him. Jake stumbled back from the window, heart hammering. Behind him, Emma giggled. They're hungry, she said. And they want us to come home. The Thing in the Cornfield, Part 3. Rural Nebraska, 1987. The Callahan farmhouse felt smaller that night, like the walls were pressing in. The cornfield had returned, but it wasn't the same. It loomed at the edge of the property, taller, darker, alive. The stalks swayed without wind, twisting in unnatural spirals. And the tall, faceless thing stood at its edge, watching. Waiting. Jake backed away from the window, gripping the useless shotgun. Mom, he whispered, voice shaking. We need to leave. His mother stood frozen, eyes locked on Emma, who was still smiling. You don't get it, Emma whispered, her voice light, almost playful. We're already in the field. Jake's stomach dropped. What did you say? Emma giggled, twirling a strand of her blonde hair around her fingers. We never left. The field just moved around us. Jake shook his head. No. The field vanished. I saw it. He stopped. The farmhouse creaked again. Not like wood settling, but like something shifting inside the walls. Something breathing. His mother gasped and grabbed his arm. The floor, she whispered. Jake looked down. The wooden planks beneath their feet were changing. The grain in the wood stretched, bending in slow, pulsing waves. The color darkened, shifting from oak brown to a deep, sickly yellow. It wasn't wood anymore. It was corn. The floor was becoming stalks, warping, twisting, and it was spreading. Jake grabbed his mother's hand. Run! They bolted for the front door. Jake twisted the knob, yanking it open. The field was there. The farmhouse was gone. The sky above was no longer Nebraska night. It was black, swirling with tendrils of mist that slithered and curled like reaching hands. The moon was wrong. Not a sphere, but a gaping hole of empty darkness, pulsing like a wound in the sky. The field stretched in every direction, endless. The corn hissed as it swayed, whispering things Jake couldn't understand. And then the thing stepped forward. The faceless man. Tall. Twisted. Limbs too long, fingers curling like dry roots. Its skin was the color of decayed husks, its head smooth and featureless except for a wide, jagged mouth grinning. Jake tried to lift the shotgun, but his arms felt heavy, like the air itself was weighing him down. His mother was praying under her breath, clutching her cross so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Emma walked past them, stepping barefoot into the corn. The faceless thing bent down, its jagged grin widening. And Emma, little Emma, smiled back. I told you, she whispered. She reached out and took its hand. The corn roared. The stalks exploded upward, wrapping around Jake and his mother, dragging them down into the soil. He screamed, clawing at the dirt, but the earth swallowed him whole. The last thing he saw was Emma, laughing, as she and the faceless thing vanished into the endless rows of corn. Then darkness. The Thing in the Cornfield, Part 4. Somewhere outside of time. Jake woke up gasping. His body was half buried in something soft, damp. The smell of rotting earth and old corn husks filled his nose. He pushed himself up, coughing, and his hands sank into the ground. Not soil. Not dirt. Teeth. Thousands of tiny, sharp teeth, embedded in the ground like seeds, clattering together as he moved. Jake jerked back, heart pounding. He looked around. The cornfield stretched forever in every direction, no longer bound by the land he had known. The sky above was an empty, shifting black, the wound of a missing moon bleeding shadows. The house was gone. His mother was gone. And Emma. Emma was standing at the edge of the cornfield, waiting for him. Her hair, once golden, was now the color of dried husks. Her skin was paler, her eyes dark and hollow. But the worst part, the part that sent a sick shudder down his spine, was her smile. Too wide. Too many teeth. You woke up, she said, tilting her head. Emma. Jake took a step forward, then stopped. The ground shifted beneath his feet. The whispering corn sighed, like it was breathing through thousands of unseen mouths. Where are we? Emma giggled. We're home. Jake shook his head. No. No, the house, Mom, Dad. Emma's grin faltered. Dad didn't belong, she said softly. That's why the field took him first. Jake's stomach twisted. She took a step closer. But you do, Jake. I do. I heard them calling. I answered. She stretched out her hands. Her fingers had changed, elongated, sharpened, like dried roots twisting in the wind. Come with me, Jake. It's easier if you don't fight it. The corn behind her shifted. Shapes moved between the stalks, tall, thin figures, their faces smooth and empty, their bodies wrong. The whispering of the corn grew louder, words forming in the rustling of the leaves. He is almost ready. He must grow. He must become. Jake staggered backward. No, he whispered. Emma's expression darkened. Her mouth opened too wide, splitting her face from ear to ear. Rows of jagged teeth gleamed in the dim light. Don't be afraid, she whispered. We planted you long ago. The ground lurched beneath Jake. His legs sank, the earth swallowing him up to his knees. He screamed, clawing at the dirt, but the more he struggled, the deeper he sank. The teeth beneath him bit into his skin, the whispers turning to laughter. Emma crouched beside him, tilting her head. "You're growing now," she murmured. The corn screamed. Jake's vision blurred as the stalks wrapped around him, pulling him down. The faceless things moved closer, whispering, reaching. Then suddenly, light. A blinding, searing light cut through the black sky. The corn hissed, recoiling. The faceless things shrieked, melting into the stalks. Emma screamed, a high, distorted wail, as she fell backward, shielding her eyes. Jake felt hands grab him, human hands. A voice, familiar, desperate, shouted his name. And then, everything went white. The Thing in the Cornfield, Part 5. Somewhere between worlds. The light swallowed everything. Jake felt weightless, like he was floating between sleep and waking, between life and something else. Then pain. His body slammed onto solid ground. The scent of damp earth and rotting corn was gone, replaced by the crisp, sharp smell of rain-soaked soil. He gasped, lungs burning, and opened his eyes. He was back. The Callahan farm stretched around him, but it wasn't right. The cornfield was gone again, replaced by barren soil, stretching endlessly toward the horizon. The farmhouse stood nearby, but it was wrong, aged, weathered, the paint peeling as if it had been abandoned for decades. The air was heavy, thick with something unfinished. A hand gripped his shoulder. "Jake," a voice rasped. He spun, his heart leaping into his throat. It was his mother. She looked older, thinner, her face streaked with dirt, her clothes tattered. Her eyes, once warm, were filled with a terrified knowing. "Mom," Jake croaked. She nodded, gripping his arms tightly. "You weren't supposed to come back," she whispered. A chill ran down his spine. "Where's Emma?" he asked. His mother's face twisted in horror. Before she could answer, the wind picked up. But it wasn't wind. It was a whisper. He wasn't ready. He should have stayed. Jake's blood ran cold. He turned back toward the barren field. And froze. The ground had begun to crack. Beneath the soil, something was moving. His mother tightened her grip on his arm. "Jake," she whispered, voice shaking. "We have to run." But Jake couldn't move. Because from beneath the cracked earth, something was crawling out. And in the distance, hidden within the shadows of the empty field, Emma was watching. And she was smiling.